in and get started. Take your feet in. If you do need to use the restroom, we have this building here as well as those those green bathrooms back there as well. This group is leaving, so if you want to spread around, we have a space here. I'll be on this side, so I can talk about all the stuff. But if you want to be underneath the shelter, feel free to do that. And spread out.
Underneath the shelter sounds good.
Alrighty, so welcome to Saxman Park or Saxman Village. This pole here is the Chief Evetts Memorial Pole. It was put up originally in 1892. It does have a date on it, and at one point it was the longest standing pole in Ketchikan until it fell over, and now a new pole reigns supreme. In the park we're going to see a couple of different types of poles, and they use them for multiple different reasons. A memorial pole was also called a funeral pole. So when someone had passed away, especially someone with high status, they could carve a totem pole for them, and they would then put it up. And on the occasion, because here in Southeast Alaska, especially here in Ketchikan, we are an island, and we do not have a lot of topsoil, typically about 6 to 18 inches at most, which means digging graves was just not a possibility, and so cremation was the common practice of burial. So if they did cremate a person and they did make a pole, sometimes they would also create a notch in the pole they could then put some of the ashes in so that they'd be connected to their pole. And so this particular pole, you can see it's quite large. Traditionally they'd be carved out of a single piece of wood. However, certain pieces like long beaks or fins or wings could be attached at the very end. They'd create a notch in the pole, and then they'd slide those in with the glue on the notch, and it would secure it in, and then it would be raised. Once a pole was raised up, it was traditionally left that way. It would not be touched up, it would not be repaired, because they believed that totem poles had a natural life cycle. And once that life cycle was over, that's when they would fall over. They'd become what we call a nursing pole, and then they'd give those nutrients back to the earth. And because totem poles are typically carved out of red cedar trees actually grow from the death of old cedar trees. So out in the forest, you'll see little saplings sprouting out of red cedar stumps. That's how they grow. And so it's also a way to give back to the earth after they had taken a tree from it, so that more trees could then grow from that totem pole. The typical lifespan of a totem pole could range between 50 to 100 years. 50 would be quite a short lifespan. 100 years would be a pretty good lifespan for a totem pole. You'll see in the park that totem poles typically also have the back of them carved out because red cedar trees rot from the inside out. And that was another way to preserve them, as the outside is much harder. And so to preserve the totem pole, they would carve out the back. And so you'll see that as we go into the park, totem pole park up there on the hill. But you'll notice there's lots of different colors on our pole. They had 5 or 6 main colors. The three of them were the most common. The greenish blue you'll see in the park, red, and black. Depending on the native group, they would use a different combination of colors. The Tlingit mainly used black and red for their totem poles. The Haida used black, red, and blue, and the Tsimshian mainly used red and blue, or red and bluish green. And so you'll see that we also have yellow, brown, and some white as well. White came from seashells. They would crush them up. Yellow came from wolf moss or sulfur. And then brown came from bark, from tree bark. What they do is they crush up these different minerals and items into a fine powder. The women of the village would then chew up salmon eggs, and the oil contained in the eggs they would then separate with their teeth from the pulp. They then spit the oil into a dish and mix it with their minerals. And once they had done that, they created oil-based paints they could then apply to their totem poles. These paints did last for quite a long time. They were a very high-quality paint, typically between 30 to 35 years in our lovely Ketchikan weather that you're getting to experience today. Whereas nowadays, because the women no longer want to choke salmon eggs, which I don't blame them, we now use hardware store paints. And so they typically last a little bit less time, typically about 20 to 25 years. And so that's where this pole came from, and kind of how they would go about that. Inside the carving shed, you'll see that there is a depiction of how they traditionally would raise a totem pole there on the upper back wall. That's also an active carving shed. You'll see some of our carvers in there right now, working on a pole that is going to be going up in this part once it's finished. And I'll show you which one they're replacing. And so that's the pole in the very back. You also see the tools hanging up on the shelf back there as well. We call those adze tools. So the main tool that they would use would be the elbow adze, named because it takes the exact same angle as your elbow when your arm is folded. I believe it's a 40-degree angle. And so they would use red alder tree branches because those were the branches that grew at that natural angle on those trees. That's how they grow. And so it was an easy way to get that specific angle that they were wanting. The blade, they would make out of metal, bone, and stone. Typically, it was bone and stone until eventually, once trade began, they were able to get metal blades, once they got forged metal. And so that's how they would have carved a totem pole. We're going to make our way up into the park now, and we'll talk about all the totem poles up there. Are there to represent a person's clan. Their main clan would have been the eagle, and their sub-clan was the beaver. That is actually one of three. They made a set of 3 poles. There's that one representing the oldest brother. Down across the road, you'll see another eagle beaver. And then skip a pole, and you'll see another one with the beaver at the bottom, and the top is missing the eagle. That is the one that is actively being carved in the totem carving shed. That is that pole. They're actually getting ready to replace that one where the eagle fell off. So hopefully it should be done this year, is what I've been told. And then across the road facing straight, and the one that would have been would be facing down. That was a way of depicting that they would continue to carve brother. Below that you see. And in this one, you'll see that there's a little space in between the ears of the beaver and the very head. That was a way of depicting that he left behind a child. That's that figure. You'll notice that the tail of that beaver also has a face on it. That very way of depicting strength. That's a very different top. It has, well, basically nothing to do with the story that's contained in this pole. So that is the Lincoln pole. Here it looks like once upon a time, the raven and the clan were at war with one another. It was a very brutal and bloody war. Many people have been killed because of it. And the eagles were winning. They were chasing the raven clan and managed to surround them on a desolate island, just a pile of rock. There was no vegetation, no fresh water, there was nothing. And so they were waiting for the ravens to either surrender or die. Well, the Raven Chief felt quite distraught about his people's situation, and so he was sitting on the shore one day, and off in the distance he saw a great large ship. Well, they were dead either way, and so he thought he'd try to sue for help, see if he could get some help from whoever was aboard this ship. So he paddled over to them and met the captain and crew. He told them about what was going on, and the captain was the captain of the U.S. Navy's Lincoln. So he was not very happy about this situation. He did not like the fact that there was a war going on in U.S. territory, so he decided he would put an end to it. He would get this peace negotiated. So him and his crew took their muskets and their rifles, their advanced weaponry, and met with the Raven Chief and his warriors and surrounded the Eagle clan in the dead of night. When the Eagle Chief awoke and came outside, he saw that he was surrounded by his advanced weaponry and knew that if he were to try to fight back, his people. So he surrendered. The Eagle Chief and the Raven Chief went back to the ship, and a peace treaty was negotiated between the two clans that still stands today, never broken after that.
Picture? Doon na po ito kung park the bear?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. No, I know the bear is too big. Ready? Mírame. Say Alaska.
Alaska.
Yeah. Park the bear.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta go.
I'll take a picture and put it on the chair.
Yeah, but that's the size of it now.
I'm sorry.
I saw it there, like, really. I can put a bigger money on it.
I know, right?
Oh, God.
It's a magnet. A little magnet.